In the quiet mountain town of North Winter, where snowstorms speak louder than words and midnight feels like a doorway to another world, one loyal German shepherd made a choice that changed everything. On a frozen highway, just seconds before disaster, he refused to let his partner open a door that should have ended his life. That single act of instinct, courage, or maybe something greater, uncovered a truth long buried beneath the snow. Before we begin this journey of danger, loyalty, and unexpected miracles, I want to know where you're watching from today. Comment your city below, and let me welcome you to a story shaped by winter, guided by faith, and carried by a dog who never gave up. The first real storm of winter rolled over North Winter like an old white animal, heavy and determined, covering the little mountain town near the Canadian border in a slow-moving shroud. Wind charged down from the ridges, slamming into clapboard houses, clawing at power lines, and sending plumes of snow swirling off the deserted main street. Close to midnight, the only steady light belonged to a black and white police SUV pushing along Highway 7, its headlights carving a narrow tunnel through the whirling dark. Officer Caleb Rowan sat behind the wheel, hands easy but steady, the way of a man who had spent most of his adult life holding on through storms. At 39, his body carried the quiet strength of someone who still trained out of habit more than vanity. Broad shoulders under the thick winter jacket, forearms marked with faint pale lines where old cuts had healed into stories he never bothered to tell. His face was angular, with a straight nose and a jaw made sharper by a permanent shadow of stubble. The most striking thing about him, though, was his eyes, blue like a frozen lake, clear but distant. The kind that had watched things break and never quite thawed afterward. 2 tours in the army had carved discipline into him, but it was what happened after he came home that had turned his gaze so careful and guarded. Love had once made those eyes gentle. Loss had taught them to narrow. On the back seat, sitting upright as if he had paid for the ride and expected good service, was Aegis. The 5-year-old German shepherd looked built for this kind of night. Thick sable and black coat, fluffed against the cold, powerful chest. Long legs ending in paws that made no nonsense of snow. His ears stood tall and alert, and his dark amber eyes moved constantly, reading scents and sounds the way other creatures read headlines. Pale scars crossed his muzzle and one ear, marks from training sessions and one ugly raid the year before, each one a small, rough medal. Around his neck under the working harness hung a metal tag stamped with the words, "The Iron Nose." Someone in the department had said it once as a joke after he tracked a suspect past 3 food trucks without a single glance at the burgers. The nickname stuck because it was true. Where other dogs hesitated, Aegis followed scent like a compass that refused to spin. To most people, he was a K9 asset, a piece of living equipment with a badge number. To Caleb, he was something else entirely. Partner, shield, the last creature on earth that had seen him curled on the kitchen floor on the worst night of his life and simply laid a head on his chest until he could breathe again. Outside, the storm roared loud enough to drown out thoughts, but inside the SUV, it was almost cozy. The heater hummed, the radio muttered half-sleepy dispatch chatter, and a faint smell of coffee clung to the interior. As the SUV rolled past the dark shape of the Frost Lantern Cafe, a 2-story brick building with its signs swinging and windows frosted from the inside, Aegis flicked an ear, as if recognizing the place. To him, it was the source of bacon grease and crumbs that sometimes appeared on the patrol car seats after late breakfasts. "Don't even start," Caleb said under his breath, feeling the dog's gaze on the back of his neck. His voice was low and dry, carrying the ghost of a smile. "You're already 2 pounds over working weight. Vet says diet." Aegis let out a soft huff through his nose, a sound that landed somewhere between a scoff and a sigh. In another life, in a warmer town with softer history, that might have been the whole story. A tired cop, a hungry dog, and a quiet night. But North Winter had a way of hiding storms under its snow, and this night had teeth. A few miles past town, the road narrowed between pine stands heavy with white. Caleb's eyes swept the shoulders out of habit, tracking every broken branch and drift pattern. Years of combat patrols and night shifts had wired his senses to notice what didn't belong. That was why, when the SUV rolled over something that wasn't ordinary snow, a thin bump, a faint crunch different from the rest, he felt it, just a whisper through the steering wheel, but enough. He eased off the gas, scanning the world beyond the windshield. The beams showed nothing except the endless swirl of white and the faint shadow of a plowed ridge. The unease didn't go away. Behind him, Aegis froze. The dog's muscles, relaxed a heartbeat earlier, tightened like a coiled spring. His ears speared forward, nostrils flaring as he pulled in air through the vents with quick, deliberate sniffs. Caleb glanced up at the rearview mirror, catching the change. "What do you smell, partner?" he asked quietly. His tone shifted when he talked to Aegis, smoothing out, dropping lower, a thread of command woven with something almost like trust. Aegis moved forward, front paws stepping onto the console, body leaning toward the driver's door, his nose pressed close to the seam, breath fogging the cold glass. Then, in a burst of motion, he spun and threw his full weight across Caleb's chest, ramming him back against the seat with surprising force. A deep, raw growl vibrated from his chest. No bark, no warning for show, but something older and absolute. It said one thing: danger. Caleb's hand was already halfway to the door handle when Aegis slammed into him. The jolt knocked his fingers off the latch. For a split second, the old reflex rose in him to push the dog away. Then his training and his history with this animal spoke louder. In 5 hard years, Aegis had never done this. Not on raids, not during gunfire, not when they had chased men through alleyways slick with ice and adrenaline. Never. "Easy," Caleb murmured, voice steady, though his heart had started to pound. "What is it, boy?" Aegis didn't retreat. He planted a paw against Caleb's chest and, with another guttural growl, shoved again, as if trying to push him away from the door. His body angled to block any reach for the handle. He even snapped his teeth in the air inches from Caleb's jacket, a sharp, shocking gesture from a dog who could be gentle enough to let toddlers tug at his fur during school visits. "Do not get out," the gesture said. Caleb's fingers slowly uncurled from the handle. Years in the army had taught him that sometimes survival meant trusting the instinct that wasn't yours. He took a slow breath, eyes flicking to the snow-blurred world outside, then back to the animal who had never lied to him. "All right," he said softly. "We do it your way." Instead of the driver's side, he shifted his weight and slid across the seat, unclipping his belt with a quiet click that sounded louder than the radio. Aegis stepped back just enough to let him move, but every muscle still quivered with urgency. Caleb opened the passenger door instead. Bitter air knifed into the SUV, smelling of pine, ice, and the faint metallic edge of an oncoming storm. Snowflakes whirled into the cabin like a handful of torn paper. He stepped down carefully, boots crunching into snow that reached nearly to his ankles, and tugged Aegis out with him. "Show me," he said. The dog didn't need a second invitation. Aegis surged forward, lead taut, but instead of circling wide or sniffing along the shoulder like on a normal track, he pulled Caleb away from the driver's side, across the front of the SUV, then turned sharply and planted himself between Caleb and the vehicle's doors. His growl deepened, a low thunder rolling in his chest. That was when Caleb heard it. At first he thought it was just the engine cooling, or maybe some piece of loose metal rattling in the wind. But under the noise of the storm, there it was again. A faint, mechanical click, so soft it was almost shy. "Tak, tak, tak." The sound of a cheap timer that didn't know it was holding a life in its plastic belly. Cold slid up Caleb's spine, unrelated to the wind. Moving with the careful slowness of a man who had done this dance before on another continent, he crouched in the snow just outside the reach of the undercarriage. He angled his flashlight under the SUV. The beam sliced through the drifting flakes, found the dark gleam of metal, then something else. A compact device strapped tight to the frame near the fuel line. Wires hugged the chassis in neat lines, not the messy tangle of an amateur, but the work of someone who enjoyed precision. A small digital timer blinked red numbers, steadily eating away seconds. Beside it, nestled like a parasite against the metal, sat a small box wired to the door mechanism, its surface dotted with filaments. A heat-sensitive trigger. Open the door, let warm air rush out, trip the sensor, and the whole SUV would turn into a flash of fire and twisted metal. Caleb's mouth went dry. For an absurd heartbeat, his mind supplied the image of the North Winter Gazette headline, "Officer and K-9 lost in freak patrol explosion." The thought almost made him laugh, a sound that never reached his throat. Aegis pressed closer, his shoulders solid against Caleb's back, as if trying to hold him to the present moment. Caleb forced air into his lungs and let his gaze travel along the circuitry. Everything about it was familiar in the worst possible way. The clean lines, the efficient layout, the absence of clutter. And then he saw it. On a small metal plate near the timer, etched in a pattern of letters and numbers that most people would have dismissed as a random serial code, sat a mark. Not a name, not an obvious symbol, but a deliberate signature all the same cruel, clever arrangement that had appeared on the forensic photos 3 winters ago, when his wife's car had been nothing but blackened fragments on the side of a quiet street. His chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. For a heartbeat, the night blurred, replaced by the memory of a fluorescent-lit room that smelled like disinfectant and burned metal. A detective's voice explaining that the bomber had a style, almost like an artist. A technical report pointing at that strange identifier on the detonator, joking that the guy signed his work like he wanted the world to know how good he was. Caleb had memorized that pattern the way other men memorize the birthdays of their children. He had stared at it until the numbers swam, swearing that if he ever saw it again, it would be the last thing its owner ever carved into steel. Now, here it was, tucked under his own vehicle, ticking softly in the cold. Aegis whined, a soft, questioning sound, pulling him back from the edge of the memory. Caleb swallowed hard, the taste of copper and frost in his mouth, and forced his mind into the cool, orderly place where training lived. "Okay," he said more firmly. "We're not done yet." He backed away from the SUV, keeping the beam of the flashlight steady, but putting distance between the device and his body. His hand went to the radio on his shoulder. When he keyed it, his voice came out level and clipped, the voice of the professional that still lived under the grief. "Dispatch, Unit 3. I have a confirmed device attached to my patrol vehicle, timer, and what looks like a thermal trigger. I need EOD and roadblocks on Highway 7, half-mile radius minimum. No units approach until bomb squad clears." Static hissed. Then the dispatcher, normally half bored at this hour, answered, suddenly wide awake, asking for coordinates and status. Caleb rattled off their location without looking. He knew these roads the way some men knew hymns. As he spoke, he pulled a small kit from the back and began setting out flares in a rough circle, their red tongues of fire hissing angrily in the snow, painting the falling flakes the color of fresh blood. The storm helped. No other headlights appeared. No curious drivers wandered into the trap meant for him. When the call ended, the night settled heavy again. The only sounds were the wind, the soft tick of the timer under the SUV, and Aegis's steady breathing. Caleb knelt beside the dog and let one gloved hand settle on the thick fur of his neck. The warmth there felt almost shocking in the freezing air. Aegis leaned into the touch, turning just enough to gently bump his muzzle against Caleb's cheek, exhaling a puff of hot breath that fogged between skin and balaclava. For a moment, their eyes met, man and dog standing inside a ring of red light and snow, the bomb's faint glow reflected in both. There was no fear in Aegis's gaze, only focus and something like quiet satisfaction, as if the night had just proven what he already knew, that his job was to keep this human upright, no matter what the world threw under their wheels. "You just refuse to let me die in a stupid way," Caleb murmured, the words rough at the edges. Gratitude slid under his ribs, surprising in its intensity. He had been saved by body armor, by timing, by dumb luck more than once. Being saved because someone loved him enough to throw their weight against his chest. That was new. Aegis's ears twitched as though he accepted the compliment. Or maybe he was just listening to the distant sound that reached them then. A faint wail cutting through the wind, growing stronger, blue and urgent. Sirens. Help on the way. Caleb straightened slowly, his hand lingering for one last second on Aegis's harness. The cold gnawed at his face, but inside him, something had gone very still and very clear. The bomb under his SUV was more than a tool. It was a message, handwritten in wires and plastic, signed by a ghost he had tried to bury with folded flags and empty nights. 3 years he had told himself the man who killed his wife was gone, dead, locked up, vanished into the cracks of the world. But ghosts that arrogant didn't disappear. They waited. Tonight, in the middle of a north winter snowstorm, one of them had reached across the miles to tap on his window. As the first flashes of red and blue smeared across the falling snow and the storm closed in, tight around the small circle of light, Caleb stood beside his dog and understood, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the weather, that the enemy he thought he'd lost had just stepped back into his life. And this time, thanks to the bark before midnight, he was still alive to answer. Morning did not arrive gently in North Winter. It dragged itself over the mountains like a tired traveler, painting the sky in pale silver, while the remnants of last night's storm still rattled windows and whispered along the frozen roofs. Snow layered the streets in soft drifts, muffling the world into something hushed and cautious, as if the town itself had witnessed what happened on Highway 7 and now held its breath. Caleb Rowan walked through that muted morning with the rigid calm of a man who had slept little and thought too much. The bomb squad had spent the rest of the night dismantling the device with deliberate care, confirming everything he already knew. It was no amateur job. Everything, the wiring, the heat trigger, the serial pattern, pointed to the same ghost, the one he once hunted, the one who had taken everything from him. Aegis padded at his side through the snow, large paws sinking into the powder, his gait looser now that the night's urgency had passed, but his eyes still watchful. The band of fur around his neck carried faint frost, and every few steps he paused to sniff the air, as though expecting danger to rise again from the cold. Caleb kept his breath even, kept his expression unreadable, because he'd learned long ago that panic had a scent, and Aegis always sensed it first. What Caleb needed was clarity, and North Winter had only one place that offered it this early: Frost Lantern Cafe. The two-story brick shop stood like a warm ember in the snowy morning. A thin column of smoke drifted from its chimney, and the yellow glow from its windows reflected on the frozen street like a promise. The bell above the door jingled softly as Caleb pushed inside, Aegis slipping through behind him with the quiet confidence of a creature who believed every building was improved by his presence. Warmth enveloped them immediately: coffee, cinnamon, and the faint scent of old wood soaked in decades of conversations. The cafe was nearly empty, save for a few early risers and one woman wiping down the counter with slow, practiced motions. Maren Jacobs. She looked up as the bell chimed, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe relief, but also worry threaded so tightly into her expression that it seemed part of her bones. Maren was 33, with a presence that felt like the quiet between snowfalls. Her hair was a deep red, tied loosely at the back, a few strands escaping to soften the sharpness of her cheekbones. She had a slim, almost fragile build, but her movements carried a steadiness that came from years of shouldering responsibility. Her eyes, warm brown but with a guarded depth, tracked Caleb and then Aegis with a carefulness that spoke of someone who had learned the cost of trusting the wrong people. A faint scar traced the side of her left wrist, easily missed unless one looked close. Most never did. Caleb, by habit, did. Maren had grown up in North Winter, left for veterinary school, then returned abruptly after her father's sudden passing. Grief had pulled something out of her and left something else in its place. A woman who tried to help everyone, but trusted very few. "Caleb," she greeted softly, her voice low, carrying the cadence of someone who spent more time listening than speaking. "You're out early." "So are you," he replied, his tone clipped but not unfriendly. He wasn't good at soft edges, but Maren never seemed to take offense. Aegis walked straight to the corner seat he always claimed, an old leather bench beside the window. Maren's gaze softened slightly. "Same seat, same attitude," she murmured with a faint smile. "I'll get him some warm water." Caleb settled at the counter, the weight of the night still clinging to his posture. Maren placed a mug of black coffee in front of him before he even ordered. It was habit, or intuition, or both. She wiped her hands on a towel, leaning slightly closer. "I saw the emergency lights heading out of town last night," she said quietly. "Was that you?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Bomb," he answered simply. "Under my SUV." The words hit her hard, her breath caught, her eyes widening before she masked it with composure. She leaned closer still, voice dropping to a whisper threaded with urgency. "I need to tell you something." He studied her. Maren was not the sort of woman who overreacted, nor the kind to speak without weighing every word. That alone made his pulse sharpen. 3 weeks, she began. Every night, just after midnight, There's been a gray SUV parked across the street from my cafe. Same spot. Windows tinted. No plates. She swallowed. I thought maybe it was some out-of-town delivery crew or hunters passing through. But last night, she paused, gathering breath. Last night was different. Aegis lifted his head, sensing the shift in tone. Caleb waited without interrupting, the detective in him listening, the soldier in him preparing. I was upstairs, she said. Couldn't sleep. Storm was too loud. I came to the window around the time I usually heard the SUV arrive. Her voice trembled so slightly it might have been the cold, except the cafe was warm. I saw two men step out, dark coats. They moved like they'd done this before. One stayed near the SUV, but the other... She pointed toward the direction of Highway 7. He walked out into the storm, toward the road you usually patrol. Caleb felt something coil inside him, tight and dangerous. What did he look like? Marin hesitated, then reached under the counter for a small folder, an envelope worn at the corners. She slid it across the counter. I thought maybe I was imagining things. But I pulled the security footage. I didn't know what I was looking at until now. Caleb opened the folder. Inside were printed photos, grainy night shots from the cafe's external camera. Snow blurred the edges, but the faces were clear enough. The first man had a long scar running from his jaw to his left ear, the kind that dragged skin down in a way that made smiling impossible. A face Caleb had seen only once, many years ago, glowing red in the frame of a police photo surrounding the aftermath of an explosion. Rafe Calderon, bomb maker, ghost, the man who had vanished after killing Caleb's wife. The second man wore gloves with a distinctive symbol on the back, a stylized chemical sigil used by an underground refinery the DEA had once raided in Winter Hollow. Caleb stared at the photos until the edges blurred. Marin's voice pulled him back. There's more, she whispered. This morning, when I unlocked the door, Aegis might want to check the entrance. The dog was already moving, his nose lowered, sweeping the air near the door. Then he stiffened, letting out a sharp, guttural bark. Caleb was beside him in moments. What is it? Marin asked, worry twisting her voice. Residue, Caleb muttered. Explosive. Someone touched your door handle with it still on their hands. Last night, Marin breathed. They were here. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't have to. The storm outside might have calmed, but something far darker had taken its place, and Marin, through no fault of her own, had been pulled into its orbit. She folded her arms as though bracing herself. Caleb, I think they're watching you. But they're watching me too. Aegis moved to her side, placing his massive frame between her and the door, with the silent certainty of a creature who had already chosen whom he would protect. For a moment, Caleb let the quiet settle, feeling the weight of the revelation tighten around his ribs. He had always known the past wasn't done with him, but he hadn't expected it to step into someone else's life. We'll figure this out, he said at last. It wasn't a comfort. It was a vow. He looked again at the scarred man in the photo, that familiar cruel line carved into his face, and understood one truth with cold clarity. The storm that had taken his wife had finally returned, and this time it wasn't going to leave quietly. Snow rarely slept in North Winter, but today it felt almost alive, curling under door frames, clinging to lampposts, drifting in spirals as if it were searching for something. The storm had softened into a steady white fall, thick enough to blur the outlines of buildings and turn the world into a watercolor of gray and frost. Caleb Rowan stood beside his SUV, now temporarily replaced with a spare unit from the department, while Aegis paced in front of him, nose down, tail stiff with purpose. After leaving Frost Lantern Cafe, Caleb spent the next 2 hours reviewing Marin's security footage frame by frame. The faces, the scar, the gloves, the timing. The picture was too clear to deny. Rafe Calderon had returned, and he wasn't alone. But it was the gloves with that chemical refinery symbol that triggered Caleb's next move. Winter Hollow, a ghost town of industry, 30 minutes southeast, where abandoned warehouses and illegal workshops once dotted the frozen valley like rotting teeth. The DEA had cracked down 2 years ago, shutting down an opioid operation that had nearly drowned the region in poison. But even after the bust, rumors lingered, whispers of tunnels still in use, chemical crates quietly moved at night, and shadowy figures too entrenched to vanish. If the men from last night had touched Marin's door, had rigged his SUV, had stalked through the storm with purpose, they were still nearby. And if chemicals were involved, Winter Hollow was the only place they could hide without drawing attention. Caleb opened the passenger door of the replacement SUV and tapped the seat. "Up!" he ordered. Aegis leapt in, settling with the alert posture of a soldier waiting for deployment. As Caleb drove, the town fell away behind them. Pines thickened along the road, bending under the weight of snow. The sky hovered low and heavy, like a lid pressed onto the world. By the time they reached the outskirts of Winter Hollow, the landscape had shifted into something harsher. Old factories with shattered windows, warehouses sinking under decades of rust, and long strips of metal fencing half buried under drifts. Aegis whined softly as Caleb parked at the edge of the industrial ruins. "You smell it already?" Caleb asked. The dog gave a curt, serious huff. Winter Hollow had always unsettled Caleb. The town felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for the chance to exhale danger. Even the air tasted chemical, metallic, as if the ghosts of old crimes still clung to the wind. Caleb stepped out, boots cracking the top layer of ice. Aegis bounded out after him, nose sweeping in a practiced zigzag pattern, left, right, forward, back, covering angles with disciplined precision. Snow fell on his sable-black coat, melting into tiny droplets that traced down the fur like silver beads. "Slow and steady," Caleb murmured. He scanned their surroundings. Several buildings stretched ahead, a processing facility with broken skylights, a row of storage sheds, and to the far right, a massive warehouse with faded red paint and a collapsed loading gate. That warehouse seemed to breathe, not literally, but something about the snow drifting around its edges, swirling inward and then outward again, gave the unsettling illusion of lungs expanding and contracting. Aegis froze, nose pointed toward it. "That one?" Caleb whispered. The dog didn't move, except for a slow lift of his tail. Confirmation. They approached carefully, every step deliberate. Caleb crouched, noticing a set of footprints near the entrance, a mixture of heavy boots and smaller ones, maybe 6 or more different patterns. Snow had partially filled them in, but the spacing and direction were clear enough, multiple people moving in and out recently. Aegis crept beside him, shoulders low, sniffing intently. As they neared the loading gate, he halted suddenly and let out a short, controlled bark, the kind he gave when scent changed from recent presence to active threat. Caleb raised his weapon, heart hammering silently. "Stay close." They slipped inside through a gap in the rusted metal. Darkness swallowed them at first. The warehouse smelled of damp iron, old oil, and something else, something sharp and chemical. Caleb's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the gloom. And there it was. Crates stacked in rows, marked with foreign shipping symbols. Barrels sealed with industrial warning labels. Metallic tables scattered with tools, pliers, soldering irons, chemical vials. A half-built explosive lay disassembled on one workstation, identical in design to the device found under his SUV. Then Caleb saw the USB drive. It sat atop a metal crate, small and unassuming, but someone had placed it there intentionally, almost theatrically, as if daring him to take it. Before he could consider why, Aegis stiffened again. A sound, soft and quick, scraped somewhere in the shadows. Caleb spun, flashlight sweeping the far end of the warehouse just as a figure broke from behind a stack of chemical drums. The man bolted toward the side exit, shoving aside crates in his path. "Stop!" Caleb shouted. The man didn't listen. He fired blindly over his shoulder, bullets whining past in the dark. Aegis exploded into motion, claws scraping against the concrete, launching himself like a drawn arrow. The chase was violent and fast. Caleb lunged after them, dodging machinery and crates. Aegis caught the attacker near the exit, slamming into him with enough force to knock him off balance. The man stabbed downward with a small folding knife, slicing across Aegis's shoulder before the dog wrenched it from his hand. Caleb reached them seconds later. He delivered a sharp blow to the attacker's wrist, sending the knife clattering to the floor, then pinned the man against the wall with practiced efficiency. The attacker struggled, breath ragged, eyes wild. Caleb ripped the phone from his pocket. A message blinked across the screen, encrypted, unreadable except for one line. Delivery confirmed. Move product to North Winter Airport, tomorrow night. Target, charter plane. secure, at any cost. Caleb's pulse stilled. Airport, tomorrow, explosives. This wasn't just drug trafficking, it was something far bigger, far deadlier. He zip-tied the attacker's hands, then crouched beside Aegis. The dog's wound bled lightly, mostly a surface cut, but the sight of blood on that loyal fur made something cold form behind Caleb's ribs. "You did good," he whispered, voice low but steady. "You did damn good." Aegis nudged his arm, as if dismissing the concern. Caleb pocketed the USB, swept the warehouse one last time, and called for backup. But as they waited for the team to arrive, Caleb couldn't shake the image of that blinking message. Aegis sat beside him, gaze fixed on the swirling entrance of the warehouse, where snow drifted inward as though the building still exhaled danger. And Caleb knew. The men who had planted the bomb weren't merely warning him. They were preparing for something catastrophic. The storm over North Winter had only begun to rise. The snowstorm softened by morning, muting North Winter in a veil of white so delicate it almost looked peaceful, if one didn't know what lay beneath the ice. But Caleb Rowan had long stopped believing in peaceful winters. Peace, he'd learned, was only the silence between storms. He stood inside the temporary command post the DEA had set up in an old ranger station, the heater clicking loudly as it tried to push warmth into the wooden walls. The place smelled of damp coats, gun oil, and something sterile in the air that felt too close to hospitals and memories he didn't want to revisit. Aegis lay beside him, the bandage on his shoulder fresh but unobtrusive, the dog's posture alert despite the injury. He refused to rest, and no one, not even the vet, had the courage or authority to insist. Caleb didn't push it either. If Aegis wanted to work, he'd let him. The dog understood situations in ways humans rarely did. Across the room, Maren Jacobs stood stiffly near a table, her hands wrapped around the cup of tea she hadn't sipped in 10 minutes. The moment Caleb had arrived with a cut-up K9 and a prisoner in cuffs, her calm exterior had cracked. She had insisted on treating Aegis's wound herself, not because the cut was life-threatening, but because she said, with a trembling sort of fierceness, "He saved you twice in 12 hours. Let me do something." What she really meant was, if they hurt him, they can hurt you. And that terrified her. Now, under the flickering fluorescent light, she looked smaller than she had in the warm glow of the cafe. Her red hair was tied back in a messy knot, her eyes still shadowed from shock, her posture braced as though anticipating another blow from the world. Caleb approached her. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They came into my cafe, Caleb. They touched my door. They followed you. I'm already involved." He had no argument for that. Aegis shifted, picking up a scent drifting from the hallway before anyone else noticed a thing. A single low bark echoed from his chest. Warning, not alarm. Then a knock sounded. 2 DEA agents entered, escorting a gray-haired medic behind them. "We need to check the dog," the medic said. Aegis growled. "He's not a fan of needles," Caleb said dryly. "He's not going to like this either," the medic muttered. But Maren stepped between them, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Aegis, it's okay, I'm here." The dog's growl subsided. He allowed the medic to approach, if only because Maren had taken a stand beside him. Caleb watched them, this unlikely partnership that had formed overnight. Aegis usually trusted only 2 or 3 people in the world. Maren had somehow become one of them, without ceremony, simply by caring fiercely in a moment when most people would have stepped back. When the medic finished, Caleb signaled for Aegis to heal and turned to Maren. "I need you to stay somewhere safe." "I'm safer near you than anywhere else," she answered, and though the words carried no romance, just determination, it tugged something deep behind Caleb's ribs. "What did you find in the warehouse?" Caleb hesitated, then handed her the printed translation of the message recovered from the attacker's phone. Her eyes skimmed it, her breath catching. "They're going to the airport tonight?" "Not going?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "They're planning something." Before Maren could reply, the door to the ranger station opened again. An agent rushed in, breath clouding the air. "Rowan, your spare unit, the SUV that replaced your bombed one. It's been followed since dawn." "How long?" Caleb demanded. "Long enough that we know it's the same gray SUV the barista spotted." Marin stiffened. "They're still watching you." "Not just me," Caleb corrected. "Anyone near me." He motioned for Aegis. The dog rose instantly, bandaged shoulder forgotten. "What do you want to do?" the agent asked. Caleb didn't have to think. He already knew where he needed to go. "Let the SUV lead us there," he said, "but not directly. We'll plant a scent marker on the follower." The agent blinked. "A what?" A smirk ghosted across Caleb's mouth. "Aegis and I use them overseas. It's designed for K9 units to track evasive targets. Think of it like a scented tracker, nearly impossible to wash off." Even the agent looked impressed. "You really think he can tag the vehicle?" "I don't think," Caleb said. "I know." 10 minutes later, Caleb, Marin, and Aegis were tucked inside an unmarked truck halfway down an alley off Birch Lane, watching the decoy SUV circle the block like a mechanical ghost. Snowflakes drifted through the air, catching light from the street lamps and turning the night into a swirling silver haze. The gray SUV appeared at the end of the street, silent, predatory, keeping a safe distance behind the decoy. "It's them," Marin whispered. Caleb's hand hovered over Aegis's harness. "Not yet," he murmured. "Wait." The gray SUV slowed near the alley's mouth. "Now!" Aegis exploded from the truck like a bullet with fur. Caleb sprinted beside him, his boots pounding through the snow. Aegis dashed toward the gray vehicle, leapt, and slammed his front paws against the rear bumper, pressing a small capsule against the metal. The capsule burst silently, releasing a microscopic vapor invisible to the human eye. The driver panicked. The SUV swerved, nearly fishtailing. A dark silhouette in the back seat jerked toward the window, but didn't fire. They were under orders not to provoke police attention. And then the vehicle sped into the storm. Caleb watched it go, breath fogging in the cold. A victorious glint crossed his eyes. "Got them." Aegis returned proudly, tail high. Marin exhaled shakily. "That was terrifying." "That," Caleb corrected gently, "was strategy." They followed the invisible trail. Well, invisible to humans. Aegis tracked it with relentless focus, nose close to the ground, occasionally pausing to adjust direction. Snow thickened around them, the wind slicing across the open terrain as they crossed the railroad tracks and headed toward the outskirts of the old shipping district. Beyond the storm's veil, warehouses sprawled like steel skeletons. The nightlights barely broke through the swirling snow. Aegis barked once, sharp, alert. Caleb spotted it. A cluster of shipping containers stacked like mismatched bricks near the old freight yard. One container near the back sat at a slight angle. Light flickered within small cracks near its door. They approached in silence. Aegis moved first, sniffing along the metal, his ears pricked forward, tail lifting slightly. A sign of danger. Caleb signaled Marin to stay low, then nudged the door with his boot. The metal groaned. Inside the container, maps of the Northwinter Airport, printed schedules for air traffic security rotations, a partially assembled device meant to jam radar, and 2 sets of fake pilot uniforms. But what froze Caleb wasn't the equipment. It was the photos. Dozens of printed images pinned to the wall. Some of him, some of Aegis, and some of Marin, Caleb whispered. She stepped inside, her breath catching as she recognized the angles. Her walking home, locking the cafe, standing at the window, taking out the trash behind the alley. "They've been watching me for weeks," she said, voice trembling. Why me?" Caleb didn't soften the truth. "Because you saw them, and now they know you talked." In the corner, Aegis let out a low growl, the kind that vibrated with warning. A second later, a scuffing sound echoed outside. A shadow darted behind the containers. Caleb reacted instantly. He fired a warning shot into the air. A figure broke into a sprint. For the darkness, for safety, for the storm. But in their panic, they dropped something. A single playing card, landing face up in the snow. Ace of Spades, the calling card of the Black Spade Syndicate. "They're not done," Caleb muttered. Snow whipped around them, heavy as smoke, thick as breath. Aegis pressed against Caleb's leg, ready for whatever came next. Caleb's voice was low, steady, almost grim. "If the cartel is preparing something at the airport, we don't have much time." Marin stepped closer, fear shaking her frame but resolve in her voice. "Then you can't face this alone." Caleb didn't answer, but the silence itself was an acknowledgement. The storm wasn't just following them now, it had already arrived. Snow came again, not softly this time, not as a gentle veil that quieted the world, but as thick, wind-whipped curtains that turned North Winter into a pale battlefield. The storm struck with a strange metallic taste, as though the air itself sensed something brewing beneath the surface. The sky glowed faintly orange where the airport lights struggled against the weather, and the sound of distant engines hummed through the icy dark like a warning. Inside the temporary command station, Caleb Rowan stood hunched over a map of the North Winter Municipal Airport, jaw tight, blue eyes calculating with the cold precision of a man who had spent too many nights preparing for the worst. Snow clung to his jacket, melting into dark patches on the fabric. His hair, always neatly trimmed, fell slightly messy over his brow, evidence that he had run a hand through it one too many times while thinking. Aegis sat at his heel, posture alert, bandaged shoulder barely slowing him. The German shepherd's amber eyes glowed like molten gold under the fluorescent lights, unwavering, unblinking, steady. He had sensed the tension long before Caleb spoke a word. Dogs always knew when the air thickened with danger. Maren Jacobs stayed near the wall, arms crossed tight around herself. She had insisted on joining the briefing. She wasn't trained for combat, wasn't part of any official team, but fear had transformed into something sharper inside her, a stubborn resolve to see this through. Her red hair glimmered against the dim light, her brown eyes shadowed but steady. The storm had carved new lines into her expression overnight. Fear, anger, and the weight of being dragged into someone else's war. DEA agent Harper finished speaking, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He was a tall, bookish man with a mind wired for patterns, but a body that did not look suited for blizzards or raids. "So, based on the encrypted messages," he said, tapping the board, "the cartel plans to transport both narcotics and explosive components out of the country using a charter plane scheduled tonight. They needed the radar jammer to get past the tower. If they managed to install it, the airport wouldn't detect unauthorized takeoff." "That's just the surface," Caleb muttered. Harper blinked. "Meaning?" Caleb looked up slowly. "Cartels don't risk coordinated airport operations for drug smuggling alone. Too sloppy, too public, too much risk for too little gain." Maren's voice was quiet but steady. "So, the bomb? They were going to use it?" Caleb nodded once. "They didn't plan to carry a bomb. They planned to plant it." A cold silence fell over the room. Harper swallowed. "On the plane?" "No," Caleb said. "On the runway, or the control tower, or security hub. Something that causes a blackout, panic, confusion. During that window, they fly out undetected." Harper rubbed his temples. "We were preparing to reinforce. The border station tonight. We assumed trafficking, not explosives." "That assumption," Caleb said sharply, "would have cost lives." Silence once more, because no one could argue. Aegis let out a low growl, feeling his partner's tension. Maren spoke softly into the quiet. "Then you have to go back there, tonight." Caleb exhaled slowly. "We all do." The approach to the airport. North Winter Municipal Airport was small by national standards. Nothing more than 4 hangars, 2 runways, a modest terminal, and a control tower that swayed faintly in the wind. But tonight, it was a hunting ground. Snow blew in fierce, chaotic spirals like the ash of some ancient pyre, giving the world an eerie, flickering glow beneath the floodlights. The special response team moved silently across the tarmac, their steps absorbed by thick snow. Aegis led the way, guided not by sight, but by scent, the faint metallic tinge of explosives that clung to the wind like a ghostly fingerprint. Maren stayed inside the armored vehicle parked near the fence line, clutching a blanket someone had thrown over her shoulders. She wasn't part of the raid, but she wouldn't abandon the scene. Through the window, she watched silhouettes move through the storm, Caleb's figure unmistakable, tall, steady, purposeful. Her breath fogged the window. "Come back," she whispered, voice cracking. "Both of you, come back." Inside Hangar 4, Aegis halted outside Hangar number 4, ears pinned forward, tail rigid. He barked once, sharp, decisive. Caleb signaled the team. They moved to each side, forming the sweeping arc of a practiced breach unit. Snow hammered against the hangar doors like fists demanding entry. Caleb leaned into the metal and listened. Voices inside, movement. A humming, faint but unmistakable. A device warming up. He lifted his hand. 3, 2, 1. The team burst inside. Light exploded across the hangar as snow blew inward. Shadows scattered. The scent of chemicals and burning wiring stung the air. 6 cartel soldiers spun toward them, weapons drawn, and standing at the far end of the hangar, near a metal case wired to a modified detonator, was Rafe Calderon. The scar across his jaw was deeper than the grainy camera photo had shown. Up close, the man radiated something feral, a coldness that seeped into everything around him. His hands were steady, too steady. "This time, Rowan," he called, voice dripping with venom. "No mistakes." Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. His body lowered into a ready stance, gun angled, breath calm, and Aegis growled, a low, visceral sound that vibrated across the hangar. Gunfire exploded suddenly, bright flashes slicing through the cold air. DEA agents took cover behind crates. Sparks showered from ricochets. Aegis darted between cover points with the fluid grace of a trained combat dog, weaving around crates to flank. Caleb moved with ruthless precision, firing only when sure. 2 cartel gunmen fell, sliding across the icy concrete floor. But Rafe wasn't shooting. He was working on the detonator. Caleb noticed the wiring, the thin copper coils, the blinking LED panel. His blood ran cold. "Stop!" he shouted. Rafe grinned, lifting the device just enough for everyone to see. "We both know what happens if I push this." Aegis barked again, urgent. The cartel soldier nearest Aegis swung his gun toward the dog. Caleb reacted faster. He grabbed a stray Kevlar shield leaning against a crate and hurled himself in front of Aegis. The bullet hit the shield with a metallic crack, forcing Caleb backward from the force. Aegis sprinted past him, leaping straight at Rafe. The impact was violent. Rafe screamed as Aegis's jaws clamped onto his wrist, forcing the detonator free. It clattered across the floor, skidding into a pile of tools. Another cartel soldier tried to shoot the dog, but Caleb tackled him, the blow sending both men crashing into metal containers. Chaos erupted, but Aegis didn't let go. Rafe thrashed, slamming his arm against a crate, blood smeared in wide arcs. Aegis held firm, teeth sunk deep, not to kill, but to stop, to disarm, to protect. Caleb rose, gun aimed. "Don't move!" Rafe's knees buckled. The detonator lay on the ground, blinking harmlessly. The device wouldn't blow. Aegis had knocked out the primary connection. "Get your hands up!" Caleb commanded. There was no ghost left in Rafe now, only a cornered man. Backup swarmed the hangar. Agents secured the suspects, combed every inch of the hangar, dismantled the bomb. One of them called out, "Runway 12! There's another device hidden in the cargo plane." Caleb sprinted outside with Aegis following, breath burning in the icy air. They reached the plane, lights glowing beneath the wings like 2 cold eyes. The bomb squad descended on the device. Within minutes, they disarmed it. Snow continued falling, like ash over a battlefield. And Northwinter survived the night. After the raid hours later, Rafe Calderon was loaded into a transport vehicle, wrists bound, head bowed. He didn't look at Caleb, but Caleb didn't need acknowledgement. Justice didn't need an audience. Aegis leaned against Caleb's leg, exhausted but undefeated. Marin ran toward them from across the tarmac, boots slipping on the snow. She stopped only when she reached Caleb, breathless. "You're alive," she whispered, relief breaking across her face. Caleb nodded once. Aegis nudged her hand gently. She lowered herself and wrapped both arms around the dog, tears falling into his fur. The storm calmed finally, snow drifting downward like absolution. And for the first time in years, Caleb allowed himself to breathe, a long, steady breath that didn't taste like grief, just cold air, snow, and survival. Dawn arrived slowly, as though the sky itself was hesitant to return after the night Northwinter had endured. The storm had passed, leaving behind a fragile hush over the mountains, and the first threads of gold began weaving through the thinning clouds. Snow blanketed everything, hangars, runways, pine ridges, as if the world had been washed clean. Caleb Rowan stood alone on the end of runway 12, the very place where a hidden bomb could have gutted the airfield only hours earlier. Now it lay quiet, peaceful even, with faint wind brushing across the open space and the distant cry of a hawk circling in the pale morning light. He had been awake for nearly 24 hours, but his body held steady, fueled by something older than adrenaline, something like closure or its beginning. Aegis padded toward him through the snow, wearing a temporary vest that covered his sutured shoulder. The big German shepherd moved with a cautious but confident gait, tail swaying slowly. There was no limp, only the proud tilt of a dog who had fulfilled every instinct carved into his bones. The medal around his neck, freshly attached by one of the airport security officers, glimmered faintly in the rising sun. Caleb knelt in the snow to meet him. His gloved hand cupped the dog's muzzle, fingers sinking into warm fur. "You saved a hell of a lot of people last night," Caleb murmured, voice low but weighted with meaning. "Not that you'll ever brag about it." Aegis let out a soft chuff, leaning his head against Caleb's chest, accepting the praise with the dignity of a creature who already knew his worth. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind them. Marin Jacobs approached slowly, wrapped in a thick wool coat borrowed from the command post. She still looked shaken, eyes rimed with sleeplessness, cheeks wind-burned from the cold, but there was a clarity in her expression now, a steadiness shaped by everything they had survived. In the pale light, her red hair looked almost copper, flickering like the flame that had kept her standing through the storm. "I thought I'd find you out here," she said softly. Caleb rose, brushing snow from his knees. "Just needed some air." "I don't blame you," she whispered. "Last night was more than anyone should have to endure." Her gaze flicked to Aegis, full of tenderness and relief. She knelt and touched his vest gently. "And you... I hope you know what you did. You're a miracle." Aegis nuzzled her gloved hand, and Marin let out a shaky laugh that was half joy, half exhaustion. Behind them, the DEA team was finishing their final sweep. Emergency vehicles idled, officers shared tired congratulations. And in the center of the commotion, two marshals escorted Rafe Calderon toward a secured transport van. Caleb turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing as he watched the man step into custody. Rafe's face was unreadable. No gloating, no regret, only a chilling calm, as though he had been expecting this end from the beginning. The scar along his jaw caught the morning light like a blade. As the marshals guided him forward, Rafe paused, just briefly, and looked over his shoulder. His eyes locked with Caleb's. There were no words exchanged. None were necessary. Caleb held the stare until Rafe disappeared inside the armored vehicle. Only then did he let out the long breath he'd been holding. "It's over," Marin said quietly. "Mostly," Caleb replied. She hesitated. "You think someone else was behind him?" Caleb shook his head. "I think men like him leave a long shadow. But for now, yes, it's over." Aegis nudged his palm as if seconding the answer. Marin's voice softened. "You did it, Caleb. You stopped him. You stopped them all." He didn't answer immediately. For years, the thought of justice had been a bitter, unreachable thing curled between his ribs. Now that it was here, real, tangible, done, it felt almost weightless. Less like vengeance and more like a doorway rediscovered. Finally, he said, "We did it." They stood together in the cold morning, not touching, not speaking, just sharing the quiet that came after storms. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was something gentler. Two people who had walked separately through grief, now standing on the same side of a new sunrise. A siren chirped in the distance, breaking their stillness. Agent Harper jogged across the runway holding a clipboard, his breath puffing clouds. "Rowan," he called, "briefing in 5 minutes. Then you're cleared to rest. DEA's wrapping the case." Caleb nodded. "I'll be there." As Harper turned away, Marin reached out and touched Caleb's arm lightly, hesitant, testing whether she was allowed to offer comfort. "You should rest first," she said. "You need it." He gave the smallest shake of his head. "After the report." She smiled faintly, wry, gentle. "Of course. I keep forgetting you don't know how to stop." "I stop," Caleb said. "Sometimes." "Maybe you'll let someone teach you," she murmured. Caleb didn't respond, but something unspoken passed between them, something warm enough to counter the ice at their feet. 3 months later, Northwinter changed slowly, but some transformations could not be missed. At the police station, a new plaque hung beside the entrance. K9 Unit HQ, Northwinter Precinct. Commander, Officer Caleb Rowan Lead. K9 Aegis Valor's Star. Recipient Aegis's photograph, taken the morning he was awarded the medal, showed him sitting proudly with one ear slightly bent, an imperfection Marin had refused to let the photographer retouch. Caleb had protested the promotion, insisting he was just doing his job, but the town disagreed. For the first time in years, he didn't argue with their gratitude. In the Frost Lantern Cafe, sunlight filtered through new windows. Marin had replaced the old ones, shattered by stray bullets during the cartel's escape attempt, days after the raid. Now the cafe buzzed quietly in the mornings, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of locals returning to a place that had survived alongside them. Caleb sat at his usual corner table, writing reports on a tablet while Aegis napped on the floor, paws curled beneath his chest. Marin walked toward them, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one for Caleb and a small ceramic bowl of warm water for Aegis. "You two eat here more often now," she said, setting the drinks down. "Helps keep the place in business," Caleb replied. "Helps keep you human," Marin corrected softly. Aegis lifted his head and thumped his tail. Outside, snow glittered under the sun, and children played near the steps of the rebuilt community center. Church bells echoed off the mountain ridges in a slow, steady rhythm, peaceful, reassuring. Caleb breathed in slowly. The weight he had carried for so long was no longer dragging him down. It had become something else, a reminder, not a chain. Marin leaned on the counter, watching him with a softness that wasn't love yet, but wasn't far from it either. "You look lighter today," she observed. "It's the sun," he said. "It's more than that," she replied. Caleb didn't deny it. Aegis rose, trotting to the window to watch snowbirds pecking at crumbs outside. His tail wagged lazily, leaving small streaks on the wooden floor. Marin smiled. "He likes the morning light." "So do I," Caleb said. For the first time in years, the horizon didn't look like a warning. It looked like a beginning. And on the snowy field just outside town, Aegis ran in wide circles, fur glowing, breath steaming, leaving behind paw prints that trailed toward a future that finally felt open. Some miracles didn't fall from the sky. Some walked beside you on 4 legs, refusing to give up until the sun found its way back over the mountains. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come quietly through a loyal dog who refuses to step aside, through a brave officer who keeps moving forward even when his heart is heavy, or through the strength God places in ordinary people when they think they have nothing left. This story reminds us that in our own lives we walk through storms, 2 days of fear, worry, or confusion when we do not know what comes next. But God walks beside us even when we cannot see Him. He guides our steps, protects our families, and sends help in ways we often recognize only afterward. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and protection. And if you believe in the quiet miracles He sends, type Amen in the comments.